Today, I'm going to talk about the experience that I had the night that my mom died, and it's coming up on 20 years. October the 24th, 2004 is the day that my mom died, and she came to visit me that evening. So there's a lot of backstory to this. About 3 years before my mother actually passed away, I had almost zero communication with her. Many reasons. My mother was an unmedicated and undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenic for many, many years. When I was a child and growing up, I didn't understand why our family was so different, or what was so different. When you're a kid, you just don't realize those things. And was one of those things that you just don't tell people. Everything, all the problems that happened at home stayed at home. I didn't know any different with my mother and my father, that until I got a little bit older, that they were way different than everybody else's mother and father. So my dad died in 1989. That's a story in itself. The whole backstory, because I was raised, they turned out to be my great aunt, my great uncle. They were not my biological parents. Though they raised me, that's who I consider my parents to be. But I was not legally adopted. I've always kind of called myself a black market baby. There's a whole story behind that, and I'll talk about that at a later time. But what's really important is that my mother was extremely mentally and emotionally abusive when I was younger. And even as she got older and she got sicker, and I helped take care of her for many, many years, it got to a point where I just couldn't take it anymore because of the mental illness, because of the things that she would say. I'm not going to give an example right now because I want to talk about my mother in more depth later, but just know that my mother was a very, very sick person. So the night that my mother died, I got a phone call from my cousin Nance, and she said, "Cindy, I need you to sit down." She was always so dramatic. And I said, "Okay, Nance, I'm sitting down, like, what's going on?" And she's like, "Your mother just passed away." So, "What do you mean?" She said, "She just passed away. She died instantly of a heart attack." So I got all of the information. It hit me pretty hard because, like I said, for about 3 years before that, for my own mental and emotional well-being, I had to go no contact. I didn't really want to, but I felt that I didn't have a choice. At that point, I had 4 children of my own, and me and my husband, we were raising 4 kids. And taking care of my mom was like a 5th child, only in a very abusive 5th child. So that night, I got the kids down to sleep, and I was really, really thinking about my mom. Really thinking about my mom. I was in great turmoil, a great sadness, a great regret. No matter what had happened, I still loved my mom very much. I still loved my dad very much. I was always very dedicated, a dedicated daughter, but I was in a lot of emotional turmoil. So I put everybody to bed, and my husband, he went to bed. He was sleeping. He had to get up early in the morning. And I walked down the hall, and I got into bed, and I just laid down silently crying, thinking about my mom, and that my mom's no longer here. And so I heard something. I thought I heard my mom's voice, but I didn't hear it I didn't hear it the way that you hear me now, or the way when somebody calls your name. It's not the way I heard it. I heard it in every fiber of my being. I didn't hear it through my ears. I always say I heard it through my soul. I heard my mother calling me. I heard Cindy. And so I got up, I sat up in bed, and I started walking towards the door. When I got to the doorway, I turned around to look to see if my husband was still sleeping, and I saw that I was in bed sleeping right next to my husband. And before I could have a reaction to that, before I could get afraid, before I could be thinking like, what the hell's going on? Before any of that happened again, I heard my mother, and it was coming from the dining room. So I walked down the hallway, and at the end of the hallway, the living room was kind of on the right, the dining room was kind of on the left, and that's where the dining room table sat for a family of 6, because we were a family of 6. And my mother was sitting at the table. And she was speaking to me, but her lips weren't moving. And I could hear her perfectly. And it wasn't just words that I was hearing. I heard her in my soul. I could feel her. I felt the love in her voice calling me. I felt the warmth. I had felt so many things that I had never felt from her when she was alive. And I was so excited to see her. And I was like, Mom. And I sat down next to her. And then the next minute, I was getting all these memories in my head, and we were laughing and we were joking. And we were reminiscing about when I was a kid and we got out of school for summer vacation, and it was just me and my mom. And we would play Monopoly, we would play Sorry, we would play Trouble. We would play all of these games. And we always had so much fun. And she would make lemonade. And, this was at a point, because not everything was bad with my family. Not everything was bad. We had bad moments. We had bad situations. But there was a lot of love there too. And we were just laughing so hard, belly laughing. And then all of a sudden, my mom said something to me. And when she said this to me, I could feel that she really meant it. And she sent the feelings and the emotions directly to me. She looked right in my eyes, and I could feel in my body. She said, I've always loved you. And I just started crying, because my mother had never told me that she loved me. My mother never once in my life said that I love you. Instead, I got, you're stupid, you're an idiot, I don't like you, you'll never amount to anything, I wish you were dead, you should have crawled back to your real mother. Like, I had always had this toxic thing with my mom. I always loved her so much, and I would tell her I loved her, and she would never tell me back, and she would push me away. But here we were at the table, her soul and my soul, and she was telling me, I've always loved you. And in that moment, I knew everything. In that moment, I knew she wasn't sick anymore. In that moment, I knew it was the sickness that had always talked to me. I knew it wasn't true. I knew that she always loved me. I knew that I mattered. I knew that I was somebody and that I didn't have to carry that anymore. I didn't have to carry that self-loathing or that self-hate for myself that I had as a child, because it wasn't true. It was the sickness. She really did love me, and she always loved me, and I could feel it. And I was crying, and I said, Mom, I love you too. I've always loved you. That's all I've always loved you. And she said, I want you to know that I didn't forget you. So let me take you to what she had meant by that. So they had a biological child 12 years after they had me, which I was not their biological child. My mother was 45 and my dad was 48 when she got pregnant for and had my little brother. They had had over 20 miscarriages. So, and 8 of them were in the 3rd term. She had given birth to 8 dead babies. What we know now is placenta previa. They didn't know that then. They didn't know why these babies kept dying. And when she had my brother was like a miracle. And when my brother was born was when everything ended for me in that home. I became the unwanted child, the unloved child, the child in the basement, sometimes the unfed child. And my brother, very, very, very selfish and self-centered. After my dad died in 1989, my mom in 2004, my mother had quite a substantial amount of money that my parents had saved. My father was a contractor and he owned his own business, Danaher Weather Stripping and then Danaher Construction. They had saved quite a bit of money. And my brother spent it, embezzled it, whatever you want to call it. He just couldn't quit spending, and he ran almost all of her money out. And when my mother died, my brother had taken anything that it could have possibly be left for me, and there was enough money to make generational wealth for both of us, for both of our families and our children. So that was what my mother meant, is she wanted me to know that she had left something for me deliberately. And I was astounded. She told me in the morning, when I got up in the morning, she wanted me to call State Farm and tell State Farm to search for an old insurance policy because it was waiting for me. And so I told her I would do that. And then she stood up. And she started walking around me, and I just started getting so scared because I knew what was going to happen. I knew she was getting ready to leave. I knew she was going to go, and the last thing that I wanted her to do was leave. When the very first time in my life my mother ever told me that she loved me, I didn't want her to go. I wanted her to stay there, and I wanted her to visit with me, and I wanted to talk about old times, and I wanted to do those things. But she had to go. She told me that she had to go, but she was there for my healing so that I could move forward and hopefully not carry that through my whole life and to heal, which I've done a lot of healing. And she got up and she walked over to the doorway, and I was begging her, please don't go, just 5 more minutes, don't go. And she stood in the doorway, and then all of a sudden this light this light and these shimmering sparkles started surrounding her. And then she told me, the last thing she told me was, "Don't worry." She smiled and she said, "I'll be back. I'll be back when it's your time." And she said, "But that's not going to be for a long time." She said, "You have a lot of work to do. You have a lot of important things to do." Then she disappeared. And I woke up instantly. I was back in bed, and I woke up instantly, and I'm like, I'm like telling my husband, I go, wake up, wake up. My mom was just here. My mom visited me. She was just here. As soon as 9 o'clock, I got to call State Farm. My mom said that there was a policy for me. And he's like going, what are you talking about? Like, he was kind of used to like all the psychic stuff and all the ghost stuff and everything that's been going on in my life. But he was just like, he was overwhelmed too. And the most overwhelming part was when 9 o'clock in the morning came and I started making my phone calls to State Farm. And that is going to be my part 2 to this video, is what happened that next day, which is equally amazing and synchronistic. And how that worked out, and just all of the events that had to line up for about 8 years prior in order to complete the next day of this. When I woke up, I was so healed. I was so healed. I didn't even feel like I had to go to the funeral. I didn't go to my mom's funeral because she wasn't there. I knew she wasn't there. What I did do is I went to the funeral home before anybody else got there. I talked to the funeral directors. I told them I was her daughter and I wanted to spend 5 minutes with my mom's body before they started anything, and they allowed me. I did go in and I signed the book. I went and spent 5 minutes with my mom's body, and it just kind of made me smile because like, here was this empty shell. That wasn't my mom. I can't cry over that. Yeah. I ended up, we're Catholic, so generally there's a couple of days showing, and then there's the church service, and then you go to the cemetery and you go to the burial. And I didn't go to any of that. But I will go ahead, and my plan is to release a video every single week. My son is going to release this for me. And then we're going to go ahead and make the part 2. And I'm going to talk about the day after the experience with my mom. But thank you very much for listening. Again, this is very cathartic. Every single time I tell this, those feelings and those emotions come back. And by talking about it, I can feel those things again. The feelings are so much deeper than we have the ability to feel within our bodies, and the emotions are so much deeper, and the love is so much greater than anything that I have ever felt inside of the body. So thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. And I will be telling my part 2 next week. Thank you very much.